Hi guys, welcome to another video. This time I'm going to show you protest photography with my Leica. So at the beginning of the year there was a general strike in this area. We're here in the Basque Country in Spain, and this general strike had something to do with the pensions. The strike that I photographed was on the 30th of January 2020. So this was still quite a while before the first corona cases in Europe. So the strike and the protests that went along with that had really nothing to do with the spread that came later. So if you see people not socially distancing and not wearing any masks, this is because there wasn't even a threat at that point. No one really knew what was gonna happen, and this had nothing to do with it. Well, actually, it had something to do with it, but I will come to that a bit later. I'm on my way to photograph a strike, a general strike. I think you can already hear some of it. I'll be looking for them. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong spot. I know where they're gonna be a bit later, so we'll see. I'm sure I'll find them soon. So the context of this general strike was that they were protesting for dignified pensions. After the financial crisis, there was a serious case of austerity politics going on in this country, and they cut down on social welfare. Not that there was much of that before anyway, but there was at least some of it. And there was also a general health service and those sorts of things, free healthcare. And they cut a lot of funding to the healthcare service. This obviously had an effect when the pandemic hit, so it's not entirely unrelated to the pandemic, but it didn't contribute to the spread or anything like that. So this general strike was called by two of the unions. Not all of them were on board, but two of the unions. Only one party supported the strike and the others were kind of against it. They said that there wasn't really a reason for the strike, but in reality there really is. So this place here is very, very touristy, and it's very dependent on tourism in general. which also means that rent here is really expensive. And also buying houses is extremely expensive here. You can easily pay for a flat with beach view €1,000,000 or something like that. It's really not uncommon. The prices are insane. Well, if you listen to the demands that the strikers had, they're really not asking for that much. One of the demands was a minimum salary of €1,200 a month, and you can easily pay rent here of €1,000. That's really not unheard of, and even a room already costs more than 500. That kind of tells you something about how high the living costs are here. This was all in cooperation with some of the pensioners associations here. They were trying to get the minimum pensions increased because they're very, very low. The pensioners were asking for €1,080 a month. They're really not asking for much, which tells you how bad the social welfare here is. And if you then also look at how badly the pandemic was handled in the healthcare service and how many people got infected among nurses and doctors and all that, then you know that the healthcare service is seriously underfunded and had been cut to the bone, which caused a lot of deaths during the pandemic. And we are right now in the middle of the second wave, and the numbers are again very, very bad. So we're probably gonna see some more fallout from all those cuts. So when most of the parties say there was no reason for the strike, then that's rather cynical, I would say. The Basque government also has official data on poverty in the region, and it's almost 10% that are at risk of poverty. And that's not even counting the actual poverty, what they don't even regard as poverty, like barely being able to afford a room in a shared flat or something like that. The strike was also supported by the environmentalists and the feminists. The feminists wanted equal pay, which is also a problem that persists here, wage inequality. So lots of reasons to protest really, but apparently not according to the parties. And another problem in the region is that 92% of contracts are temporary contracts. There's no labor security, there is bad healthcare apparently, there are low pensions, and also the purchasing power has gone down, especially among pensioners too. So lots of reasons to go on strike, I would say. This general strike was in this autonomous region, the Basque Country, and also in Navarra, so not the whole of Spain, just these two regions. Strikes, protests and marches were held in all the cities of the regions, all the bigger ones, and one of them was here. It was obviously not the biggest, because this is not the biggest town, but it's reasonably big, and I have to say that I have not seen such a big protest here yet. A few years ago I was photographing another protest that happened here in the city, and that was also, until that point, it was the biggest that I had seen here. And that went on for about a month, and it was huge. They had really big marches, and it was originally against a garbage incinerator, but it expanded into all sorts of other causes, like for example the general problems with the social welfare and the society as it is organized right now, and so on and so forth. This protest, however, was a lot bigger even, and there just seemed to be no end of the columns, and there were just so many people. I had never seen it like this. Well, the government then released official data that the strike was unsuccessful and that only a few people participated, and apparently it was ineffective, and if people thought that they would disrupt anything, then they were mistaken and all that. They were then accused by the unions that they lied about the data and included people that were on holiday and things like that as not participating in the strike. And yeah, it's very confusing. No one really knows, since obviously both sides have an agenda in this. Both the unions and the government. The government would be underreporting how many people participated, and the unions would be overreporting. So who knows really. The unions state that in total in all the protests 140,000 people participated, which is a lot. They also say that 30% of the companies and services in town were disrupted, and I can say as much for the public transport. Schools was even more, I think 50% disruptions and so on. Now, as you saw, I couldn't really translate everything that they were chanting, because most of what they were chanting was in Basque, and that's a language I don't understand. I understand like 5 or 6 languages by now. German, English, Spanish, French, Italian a bit. I can watch TV, and Russian. I can read books with a dictionary. But Basque, it's a very, very difficult language, and I so far haven't managed to master that yet. In fact, I barely understand anything. So that always leads to very interesting situations when I'm trying to photograph a strike or protest or some such thing like that, or events, because a lot of the time I have no idea what's going on. Normally the language spoken here on the street is Spanish, so I get by perfectly fine. I hardly ever need any Basque whatsoever, otherwise I would have learned it by now. But yeah, in these situations, protests and all that, that's usually in combination with a lot of the Basque nationalist kind of type of people who always speak Basque. And of course, for a big protest like that, the people from the surrounding regions would come into the city too. And in those areas around the city, people speak Basque on the street. It's just in this town here that they speak Spanish. So this wasn't the first time this happened to me, that I was at a protest and didn't really know what exactly they were chanting or what exactly the content was. One time we even ran into a big event and never actually figured out what it was all about, because all the reporting on the event was also in Basque. So that was quite funny. Never figured it out. In this case, I had informed myself before and I knew what it was all about and what the general gist of everything was. And the one thing that they chanted that I understood in Spanish was, "We're not tourists, we're pensioners," which probably refers to the high rents in this area and the high living costs and everything being very expensive because it is geared towards tourists. And that's a real problem in areas like this one. It was a very big protest and I got lots of opportunity to photograph. I had my Leica with me with the Voigtlander 50mm 1.1. This is my favorite lens to photograph this sort of thing because it separates people from the background very well, and that makes it so that you can still have a bit of separation even when you're in a crowd. At first I was shooting Rollei Retro 80S, I believe, because I still had one roll left and that has virtually no grain and I really love it for the high contrast it has. And then when it got a bit darker, I had a roll of HP5 Plus, which was the second roll that I shot. I'm really happy with the results I got in the end. There were some really cool pictures in the mix and I really enjoyed shooting there too. It was really loud and very hard to photograph in a way, but at the same time it was a challenge that I quite enjoyed. What really struck me the most while I was editing this footage was that it seemed so very relevant to the pandemic, even though it was way before the pandemic hit. And there was no way that it could have affected the numbers of corona infections afterwards at all. They were protesting against the cuts to welfare and they were protesting against the cuts to the healthcare system, which then later on caused so many deaths. I have to say that I felt quite uncomfortable editing this footage because it was so crowded and I don't feel particularly comfortable in crowds anyway, if I don't have my camera to protect myself from people. I always hide behind my camera, that helps. Watching it on the GoPro without my camera in the way, it seemed all a bit claustrophobic and there were so many people and it was loud, and I also very much felt like this while I was photographing it. I didn't stay until the very end because I already had 2 rolls shot and I was exhausted at that point. It was just input overload. It was too much for me in a way. But yeah, I think I got really cool results and it was really a big protest. I'm really happy that I got some behind the scenes footage for you guys. It's a bit different from what I share normally. Normally it's not quite that crowded in my street photography videos because I don't really like crowds all that much. But yeah, a bit of a different thing. And well, I think it's gonna be a while before I can show you more street photography because of the pandemic. So one last really big crowd. By the way, what do you think of my new background here? I put in a new shelf here. So now I have space for all my cameras. I like it a lot. I hope you like it too. And these are not all my cameras. They don't fit. Not even on 2 shelves. Not even on 3 shelves actually. There's a 3rd one in the living room. And there's some in some drawers. And also on more shelves and all over the flat really, and oops. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. It really helps out my channel, so I would appreciate it. You can expect more videos like this one. Well, maybe not quite as stressful as a protest video, but street photography when it is possible again. There's a little bit of street photography footage left from these days, but not an awful lot. But when it is possible again, I will definitely go out again and shoot more street. Until then, I will take you along into the mountains for hikes to take landscape pictures with all my different cameras, and that's always really fun. And well, there will always also be other projects along the way. So I hope I'll see you soon for another video. Bye! Pressure room. It was a bit of a different thing. What's with the door there?